Hi, this is Bighara, and this is another installment of my video blog. Today I was going to talk a little bit about something that I had actually written as an article for the Labyrinth Lord Society newsletter a few months ago. Since that seems to be on sort of a hiatus, I thought I'd just go ahead and talk about a few of the points that I brought up there. Because it was something I found sort of interesting, and as I've been running this new campaign, these sorts of things come up from time to time. And it applies pretty well to most versions of classic D&D and retro clones. And then basically what it is it's talking about a few rules that are in the books that sometimes I feel like are not always consistently applied, or sometimes people forget to use these rules. And when people talk about how lethal some of these old school games are, I find that if you look at some of these rules that are included, it does go a long way toward not necessarily eliminating the danger of it in the game, but maybe making it a little less of a killer game than some people believe it to be. So anyway, here we go. Talking a little bit about often overlooked rules. All right, the first rule I was going to talk about is monster reactions, which also applies with things like NPC reactions as well. This is a standard rule, as all the ones I'm talking about are. They're not house rules, or I don't think of them as radical interpretations of the rules as written. They're just rules that I don't know that everybody always takes into account. Reaction rules. This is the idea that not necessarily every monster is going to be instantly homicidally inclined towards the characters. Obviously, many of them are, but there will be situations where you might be able to garner a neutral or even possibly a friendly reaction from certain NPCs and creatures, depending on how the party acts and reacts towards them. It has two interesting features. One is, of course, higher charisma characters get better reactions, so that's a neat way to kind of make that stat a little less what in some versions of the game people refer to as sort of a dump stat, where it doesn't have a lot of practical application in the adventure, where in this case it does. And two, it gives an opportunity not only to possibly avoid a fight, but also even to possibly gain some benefit. Maybe you have a friendly reaction. Maybe the monster or NPC or whoever you encounter can actually be of assistance. They can, tell you, no, you should have turned left back there, or what have you. And obviously, all this would get, can be role played out. And if the player characters, draw their swords and attack, chances are that even a initially friendly inclined creature or person is probably going to change their mind. But I know for myself, I often forget to roll reactions when I don't have a predetermined idea of what the monster or monsters would be doing in that situation, or where I feel like it might be ambiguous. So another one which kind of ties into that is morale. Quite frequently, I've gotten better about it lately, but I would often forget to roll morale because it makes great sense. It's a great mechanic, and it's one where it makes a lot of sense to have, because the idea that you have, a pack of kobolds or whatever it is, are they necessarily going to fight to the death? I don't think so. I think there are plenty of cases where they would break and run. And the idea that there's this very simple mechanic that deals with that, not only can that add a lot of realism, but again, you have a situation where, say, a party of 4 or 5 characters encounters a large number of some creature like goblins or kobolds that don't necessarily have a really high morale score, and maybe if they can manage to kill the leader or make a really impressive first wave of attacks and drop a few of them, the other ones might break and run. And this is another way that very fragile PCs, especially beginning PCs, might survive an otherwise very lethal encounter. And again, without actually changing rules, but just using some of the rules which I've seen in my own games and in other games not always consistently applied. There's another interesting rule, which is the evasion rules, which have to do with running away, and the chances of someone running away from the party, or something running away from the party if they fail a morale check, or the party running away from them. And there are rules for evading in the wilderness as well as evading in like a dungeon situation. It's I'm just glancing at my notes here. You can also include things not only fleeing, but also stealth. What if you're trying to sneak around that sleeping ogre? I mean, these are all examples of evasion, and these are all cases where the party might overcome a challenge and might see some experience reward without necessarily going toe to toe with a superior force. In a recent session, a wandering encounter for these first level PCs was a troll, something that one of them instantly recognized as totally out of their league and said, we cannot deal with this thing. And they were fortunate that in the encounter distances, another fun rule where you roll randomly to see how far away the creature is, they were lucky that since they were outside, the monster was, a fair distance away. And so since they had cover, they managed to hide and distract it off in a different direction, and it just lumbered off. And I awarded them some experience for that, even though they never actually came to blows. It was an intelligent move, and it was worth rewarding. And again, just playing the rules as they are, not house ruling or adjusting or anything like that. Another rule is the trap activation rules. Plenty of old school dungeons full of all sorts of lethal traps, but if you play it by the rules, there is only a 1 in 3 chance that a trap in an old dungeon actually activates. That means if you step on the trapdoor for the pit, it doesn't necessarily open. You're supposed to roll randomly because it might be stuck or something. Now granted, if you have a whole party of people, chances are if you roll for each one of them is going to spring the trap. But that means it's not necessarily the guy first in line, and it's not necessarily everybody. So, again, this gives you another chance to survive and live to another day. Another great rule, which I think people use, but not consistently, or it's not so much they forget to apply the rule, it's just not necessarily something that they think to do. And this is more the players than the DM. And that's hirelings. Meat shields, as we like to call them. But there are plenty of rules about finding, some guy with leather armor and a spear to come with you, or a torchbearer, or a henchman to carry your stuff, or whatever. And they work pretty cheap. And they're another body in the fight. There's someone who can take some of the weight so you're not as encumbered and you can move around better. Someone who can guard your stuff if you want to bring extra gear and you leave it at the entrance to the dungeon. These are all great things they can do. And they also are an example of where that higher charisma character might get a better reaction and be, again, of a certain amount of use, where often in these games, charisma is a sort of a, like I say, some people think of it as a dump stat or just something that doesn't see a lot of play. And this brings me to the last point, which was saving throws. And this is talking about all sorts of saving throws, but one in particular I wanted to mention, which is poison. Because, there's the classic save or die situation. Poison needle, make a saving throw, you didn't make it, you're dead. A lot of people don't like that. There have been a lot of different ways to do rules about that, saying, it only does a certain amount of damage, and so forth and so on. But here's an interesting thing I noticed when I was reading the Labyrinth Lord rulebook that I had not realized, but that the neutralized poison spell actually will revive a quote-unquote dead character up to 10 rounds after they die. I thought that was fascinating. I had never realized that before. So, obviously, this isn't going to help if your party is too low a level to have neutralized poison. And it's not going to help if you have to get back to town to pay someone to cast neutralized poison. But imagine a fight where you're fighting some giant scorpion and your fighter gets stung and fails his save and keels over dead. Well, maybe your cleric has neutralized poison, but he's in the middle of the fight and he can't stop to cast it because they're dealing with the situation. Well, he's got that window of 10 rounds where they might be able to either A, finish the fight, or B, the cleric can get clear long enough to run over and cast the spell on the fighter, and it would resuscitate him. I think that's fascinating. I think that's very cool. And it does, admittedly in a fairly narrow situation, it does give you a little breathing room. Which brings me to a second observation I kind of made while thinking about this with saving throws. And that had to do with the idea that what is a saving throw? And when you look at things like third edition and stuff like that, they have the three categories, and they have you have your fortitude save, and you have your reflex save, and you have your will save, and each is based off of a score, so constitution, dexterity, wisdom, respectively. And the idea is the better, obviously, as you go up in level and depending on what class you are, you have certain saving throws, but also if you have a high score in that, it gives you a bonus to it, and so forth. And that's fine. I don't think it's a bad mechanic in as much as it goes. But something I noticed in reading the older versions of the games, like the original Little Brown books and Basic D&D and Labyrinth Lord and such, is the idea that before about first edition Advanced D&D, the idea that your scores and your stats had much to do with your saving throw wasn't really that prominent, which made me believe that I think saving throw, it might be a better way to almost look at it like luck. Instead of imagining a saving throw where you say, you're saving versus Dragon's Breath, you managed to dive out of the way, kind of thing. Rather than being something where it's a conscious volition on the part of the character saying you take some sort of action or you have some sort of resistance or something like that, maybe it's just dumb luck. Maybe some characters are luckier than others in certain ways, and maybe that's what it reflects, which would tie into a certain degree with me about why halflings have such great saving throws, because they're in literature and stuff like The Hobbit, they're very lucky. The lucky number, Mr. Bilbo Baggins, number 14. Anyway, I'm not saying that that's definitively what was intended, but it's an interesting way to look at it. The idea that no, you didn't dive out of the way of the dragon's breath, you just happened to be behind that pillar, or something like that, or the guy in front of you happened to block the worst of the blast. You got lucky. In Swords and Wizardry, for instance, there's only one saving throw, and it's just your saving throw, and it really is even more so like a luck roll. Not the only way to interpret it, and if you go with something like the Advanced Edition Companion and Labyrinth Lord, there's lots of things like Constitution affecting your resistance to poison, and so forth and so on. There's still, even in the basic version, where Wisdom can increase your save against certain spells and magic, but that's about the only thing there. But the idea being, and this has been touted before by a lot of people, including, if I remember correctly, it may have been even Frank Menstner, Gary Gygax on one of the boards before Gary passed away, obviously, talking about saving throws and saying a saving throw happens when your character should already be dead and you're getting a second chance. And that was sort of the philosophy behind the early iterations of the saving throws. So when you talk about save or die or something like that, it's like you've already done something stupid, or you were already not paying attention, or you already encountered some bad luck, and now here's a chance to ameliorate that bad luck. It's not everything is perfectly fine and then boom, you're dead. So I think it's fair to say that a lot of these old school games do tend to be kind of rough on characters, and they do tend to die kind of frequently at low levels. But if you look carefully just within these kinds of rules, I think you can see that there is a lot of stuff which I don't know is always being used by everyone, which does go a long way towards softening that edge. I mean, it's still dangerous, but it's not as deadly as it was. That's all for now. Take it easy.